All right, we've given everyone 2 minutes to join. I think we're about to get started. And I'm sure as we get moving, more people will join, and we welcome you. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Elise Rosemary. I am a Senior Vice President here at ACAM. And tonight we are going to discuss a very exciting topic. Is it finally time to reopen the amenities? And this is something that obviously we need to be very concerned about and be proactive because there are liabilities involved. So joining with me this evening, I have my esteemed colleagues as well as wonderful attorneys, Jeffrey Schwartz and Stephen Sladkis. I'm just going to give you a little bit about their backgrounds and then we will get started. So Jeffrey Schwartz is a founding member and also a managing partner of the firm SSRGA. He's practiced law since 1986 in the real estate area and has extensive experience in transactional work. His real estate practice includes the leasing, financing, acquisition, and sale of commercial property, as well as the operation, development, conversion, and sale of residential properties. He is also a counsel to a significant number of cooperative and condominium buildings throughout the metropolitan area and is a member of the New York State Bar Association's Committee on Cooperatives and Condominiums. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Jeff.
Thanks, Elise.
Stephen Sladkis is a founding partner of the firm SSRGA as well. He zealously represents clients in all facets of real estate litigation, including on behalf of cooperatives and condominiums. He also regularly handles a wide variety of construction and general commercial and corporate law cases, as well as the defense of discrimination claims, including those against cooperative and condominium boards. Mr. Sladkis also provides general counsel to boards of the firm's cooperative and condominium clients, and also lectures on many of these topics. He serves as an arbitrator in the Civil Court of the City of New York and is a member of the Cooperative and Condominium Committee of the Association of the Bar of the City of New York, and, wow, a lot of ands, is the co-chairman of the Cooperative and Condominium Committee of the Real Estate Property Law section of the New York State Bar Association.
I just retired from that.
I'm just so exhausted, I bet you didn't. Just retired? All right, well, good note. Thank you for joining us. And then our own ACAM colleagues, we've got Gina Fazzolaro, and Gina is a Vice President of Management at ACAM with over 15 years of residential management. Gina has a working knowledge of every facet of residential building management, and her understanding of the needs of property owners and residents has been very critical to ACAM clients throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and the recent flurry of new regulations. Welcome, Gina. Thank you for joining us. And last, but definitely not least, we have Jillian Berman. Jillian is the Director of Management Services here at ACAM, and her working knowledge of residential building management is coupled with her understanding of the needs of property owners and residents, which enables her to provide the best possible service to her portfolio and ACAM's clients. And I know that to be true. So thank you so much for joining us, Jillian. Welcome, everyone. So tonight we're going to do an overview about what is going on with today's climate and what is happening. So we're going to discuss ways to prepare your building, updated guidelines on mask and occupancy rules, the process of reopening, shielding the property and the board from potential issues that might come in, and also, of course, a question and answer. And as usual, we encourage you to please ask question and answers as you see them fit. We're going to do a Q&A at the end. And if you forget to ask something during this time, all of our information will be given to you at the end of tonight's presentation. And we, of course, encourage you, as always, to please reach out with any questions that you might have. So welcome, and let's get started. So Stephen and Jeff, I'm going to turn this over to you since you are our esteemed colleagues in this area. Can you please tell us a little bit about the updated guidelines that we have going on right now?
I don't know, Jeff, I'll jump in for a quick second and say, look, the CDC guidelines right now say, essentially, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask indoors. In most places, there are some exceptions, like schools and homeless shelters and a couple other
Hospitals.
Hospitals, thank you. If you're not vaccinated, however, you must continue to wear a mask and continue to socially distance. So the questions that I'm hearing, and I'll let Jeff chime in also, is, a lot of the cooperative and condominium boards that we represent are calling saying, well, can we finally stop making people wear masks in the hallways and in the elevators and the like? And the answer is, for me, maybe. Even though New York State has adopted the CDC guidelines, I know New York City has taken a little bit more of a cautious approach based upon the percentage of people who are actually vaccinated. I think as of today, maybe New York State is up to 51 or 52%. And they're saying, look, until those vaccination numbers get higher, the percentage gets higher, you're better safe than sorry, continuing to wear a mask and continuing to take any precautions or all precautions that you can. But then again, there are a lot of buildings that are saying, hey, wait, we're really done with this. And we're going to go on the honor system that if you've been vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask, walking in and out of your apartment or through the lobby or in the elevator. So that's what I'm seeing and hearing. Jeff?
Yeah, I think it's coming from both ways, frankly. I think that people are asking me, now that these CDC guidelines came out, which Governor Cuomo endorsed, and which I agree with Stephen, that the city has been taking a bit more of a cautious approach. The New York City Health Commissioner said he would still wear a mask inside. But I'm getting questions from both sides of the aisle. Really, one is, now that the guidelines have come out, can we allow people to go maskless? And on the flip side, now that the guidelines have come out, we want to still require people to wear masks. However, there are some people who just don't want to because the guidelines have come out. So can those people just ignore the building's rules and regulations and not wear a mask? And honestly, I think the answer is yes to both sides. I think a building can can either say, look, we understand the guidelines, we've read them, we respect them, but we're going to hang on for a little bit and be a little bit more cautious, and we're going to still require masks in the public areas. And for those people who aren't willing to follow those guidelines of our building, they can be, if they're the right regulations in place, they can be fined for not following the guidelines enacted by the building. Of course, on the flip side, if a building says, look, we're going to follow the guidelines and we're going to either trust people and let them go on their honor system and say, well, I've been vaccinated, I'm not going to wear a mask. Or some buildings are saying, look, we're not going to require masks, but you've got to demonstrate to us that you've been vaccinated. And I think that kind of raises the next question. And Stephen and I have talked about that. And, what comes with that ask? Can you ask? If you do ask, can you ask for a record? And what if someone says, no, I'm not going to provide it? So I don't know if Julian and Gina have seen buildings do any of these things yet, but certainly kind of that's the sphere of questions that I'm seeing.
Right. Well, one thing we do know, and I don't know if we want to jump the gun here, is that the EEOC recently came out with a guidance saying it is not discriminatory based on any perceived or actual disability to ask someone for proof of a vaccination. You're not asking someone to disclose if they have an issue.
And I think Stephen raises a great point. I mean, that's, and does the standard of any of this change between residents, guests, and employees? How are those standards different for each?
Well, let me jump to something before that I was going to say, to Jeff's point, is, I'm also dealing with lots of buildings that are saying, fine, we're going to relax the rules, notwithstanding what New York City is suggesting, better safe than sorry. But the policies that I'm helping establish are, while residents can be maskless if they're vaccinated, we're requiring all non-residents who enter the building to continue to wear masks until they enter anyone's individual apartment. And that includes any delivery people or tradespeople, nannies, you name it. Everybody wears a mask until they get to where they're going.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to add to this conversation. And I think the issue with that is that it then becomes harder to police it. So a lot of buildings are still erring on the side of caution at this point and keeping the rules stricter than what the CDC is recommending at this point.
Right. Well, to that point, Jillian, it's interesting. I raised the point with one of the buildings I represent that was going to tell all the staff too, that if they're vaccinated, they don't have to wear masks. And I raised with them, could that be an issue if someone's visiting the building and the frontline people they see in a building, they're not wearing masks? I don't know. Could that be just a weird perception, freak people out? Maybe. But, that's something to think about. If someone's coming into a building and sees a doorman or doorwoman without a mask on, but sees a resident without a mask at the same time, maybe they'll put two and two together and say, okay, they must be vaccinated, but maybe not. So just something else to think about.
I think also the interesting thing, of course, we've all been faced with COVID for the last 15 months, is it's all new and there's so many questions that are, open to interpretation. I think the one thing that we do know for sure is, number one, of course, you can't require residents to get vaccinated in order to come into the building. And number two, for now, certainly you can't require employees to be vaccinated. And I'm getting a lot of questions, of course, as to whether or not buildings can say to their staff that you can't come in unless you're vaccinated. And that the answer to that question is pretty clear, is very clear, really. You can't require a vaccination as a condition of employment, especially now because we're still in the emergency approval guidelines, emergency approval for the vaccine. When that comes out of the emergency approval phase, it may change, but the local 32BJ has issued a guidance that the question of whether vaccination can be a condition of employment is part of the bargaining, is part of the mandatory bargaining guidelines, and that's not something that buildings can do.
But just to finish Jeff's thought on that, Jeff and I have done some extensive research and reading on this, that asking, I think even a resident or an employee of the building, it's not a HIPAA violation to ask for proof of a vaccination. HIPAA only applies to medical providers, hospitals, and the like, who guard information and shouldn't be releasing it. So everything we've read, and everybody's thought, or certainly a lot of people thought, oh, it's got to be a HIPAA violation asking people to show a vaccination card. That really does not appear to be the case.
That's interesting. Is there, in regard to staff, is there a hard and fast rule when it comes to endorsing that they wear masks still if they're vaccinated? Can they not? Is it under the same guidelines that you're giving for buildings, or are staff not under the same umbrella?
Well, like I said, I have a building now that is giving the option, staff members, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. But there may be a perception issue when people come to the building and see non-masked frontline people. But I will say that I have approved this when I've had clients ask me, and I ran it by the RAB. If a building, as an employer, wants to offer an incentive for staff, $100 each to all of you to get vaccinated, that's perfectly fine, so long as if someone got vaccinated before that offer was made, they give that person the $100 too.
I also think, Elise, that it's also up to the resident as well. I think that if a resident has a staff member coming into their apartment and they're not comfortable with that staff member coming in without a mask, whether they say they've been vaccinated or they've showed proof that they're vaccinated, the employee still has to abide by their request and put a mask on.
I agree. But a way around that certainly is if a building is lucky enough for all staff members to be vaccinated, you could send a memo to all the people in the building, hooray, all our staff people are vaccinated, and then maybe the unit owner or shareholder won't freak out if a staff member comes in without a mask.
I will guarantee you, though, you will have at least one or two that will still not let them in their apartment without a mask.
That's entirely possible.
And then can I ask you, why would you differentiate between shareholders and non-shareholders when it comes to mask wearing?
My view is that, if you're not going to require objective criteria, in other words, ask them to present, I think that relying on somebody, on the word or their honor that they've been vaccinated is just a lot easier to accept from shareholders and people who and people who live in the building, as opposed to people coming in from the outside.
That's right.
Who probably are just as honest, but you don't know them. And I think as a general rule, it's easier to police and easier to enforce. Shareholders and residents, okay. Non-shareholders, non-residents, wear your masks.
I
For
absolutely.
now,
agree.
this could change next week. You know, this is all daily, changing daily. I
Right.
mean, we're all
Right.
out on the street right now. I mean, I don't wear a mask on the street, but I see plenty of people who are wearing masks on the street.
Mhm, mhm.
So, you know, I think a lot of this could change, you know, certainly if not daily, certainly weekly.
And then in context of co-ops and condos, do they have different regulations that they have the ability to enforce, or are they equal standing when it comes to this?
I would say it's the same thing.
Same thing. I would say they both have the same rules to follow.
Great, very helpful. All right, so moving on to our next topic, which would I think be, you know, the process for reopening, which I'm sure a lot of people are very interested in right now. Gina or Jillian, from an ACAM perspective, what are some of the things that we're doing? We are obviously consulting with attorneys right now, but aside from consulting with attorneys, what are the steps? I don't know who wants to take it, but
So sure, I guess I can add what I've seen in some of my buildings is, and it's noted on the slide as well, is that I think you need to understand your residents and your building, speak to your boards, and sort of take the general temperature of what's out there. I mean, we've gone through this process for over a year. We generally know, as far as being managers, you know, what the general feeling is in the building and what people, you know, are ready for. I have buildings that are, you know, very much open, you know, to contractors and, you know, gatherings, whether indoor or outdoor. And I have some buildings that are still, you know, holding back the reins a lot. So I think that that's a number one thing of just sort of understanding your neighbors and sort of taking the temperature. And then I think that when it comes to amenity spaces, I think that once again, it really becomes an individual decision. I have gyms that have been open for months and I have gyms that are still currently closed. You know, I have playrooms that are getting ready to be opened and I have playrooms that are not. And some of the ones that are opened under certain guidelines, like for playrooms, maybe only, you know, one family at a time or two families at a time with, you know, login sheets. And so that you have a little bit of control over the space. Same thing for gyms, you know, I mean, I think that we are getting to the point where people are getting a little bit more comfortable, but I mean, I think there's still sort of some reservations out there. So I think it all goes back to sort of taking the temperature of your building and then sort of assessing how you want to open your spaces.
Gina, quick question about the gyms
Sure.
that I think we've spoken about earlier, is that as far as I know, the governor's mandates are still in effect for the operation of gyms, that
Correct.
if your gym doesn't have the particular MERV 13 filter or whatever it is or called, then you're really not supposed to be opening. I mean, there are all these guidelines that were set forth months and months ago that have not been repealed.
Correct. I mean, and I guess that's the kind of extra caveat to this. So there are still guidelines out there that have not gotten revoked by the state or the city, that we are still basically under requirement to abide by. And that does have to do with filtration systems and things like that for your gym. And with that, I always say, you know, go back to your professionals, go back to your vendors, make sure that you have in place what you need to have in place, because the last thing anyone needs is, you know, Department of Health or any other city agency coming down on a building for not, you know, abiding by the correct measures.
And I think the other thing you have to remember too, with amenities and really with everything, is that I agree with Gina tremendously. I mean, the pulse of the building is important because boards have a lot of deference here and they can, you know, it's not one rule for every building. If boards feel that more safety precautions are necessary, it's within their judgment and they feel it's reasonable to put them in place, they can do it. If they want to loosen things up because that's more the feel for the building, they can do that too. So there is, you know, some latitude or significant latitude really for boards to go whatever path they may choose.
And is there any liability from the board's perspective now, given that there is that ability to do as they please? Or are they past that point?
So, you know, I mean, I listen, liability wise, I think I don't think boards can be negligent. I think as long as they're taking the proper precautions and avoiding any type of negligent conduct. I mean, I think that, gyms, there still should be cleaning being done. There should be, we shouldn't just say now that we're lightening up, we're going to take out all the hand sanitizers and take out all the wipes and stop cleaning. I don't think that's something that should be done. I think that should continue for a while. And I know for our office, we're continuing that. So I don't think, liability is something that can really attach unless a board decides to drop everything and go back to the way things were as if COVID never existed.
It's also it's extraordinarily difficult to prove that somebody got COVID due to some inaction by any board, right? So that's another layer to it as well.
So it sounds like based on the feeling of the residents, you can open up spaces, but you still need to be mindful of the fact that things are not fully, changed as far as filtration is concerned. So you still need to abide by those guidelines and make appropriate decisions accordingly.
And spacing. I think spacing is important. I mean, if the gym or the family room is unusually small, I think that's something that you really have to take into account in deciding what you're going to do in terms of reopening.
But conversely, and I agree with you, Jeff, if a family wants to rent the playroom and everyone is vaccinated there, then maybe they're going to be able to have some sort of relaxed rules.
Yeah, with that family, you mean?
Or friends who are also vaccinated.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
I suspect we're going to start seeing maybe in playrooms more kids parties and the like, or whatever. Although that raises another issue that much smaller kids, I don't believe are able to get vaccines yet.
No, below 12, no.
Right, which is a problem that people should keep in mind also.
Yeah.
Right, and it's not like you're going to see many 14 or 15-year-olds wanting to have a party in the playroom. So, that's also something to think about, that the little kids aren't getting vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is something we're going to have to deal with. I mean, as the summer approaches, you're going to see kids who are 12 and under who are not being vaccinated are going to be going to group settings and then coming back to buildings. And, that might, those kids should be wearing masks. They're not vaccinated.
I agree.
Yeah.
And they're perfectly capable of getting COVID.
Absolutely.
From an ACAM perspective, knowing that, there might be the result, as you guys are saying, booking playrooms now might be something that a board is asked to change. So you're going from not being able to use the playroom at all to now being, allowed to book the space individually. What's the best way to handle? Do you have any best practices for handling booking and controlling occupancy in amenity spaces?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of buildings, if they do use something like Building Link, which is a communication platform that a lot of buildings do have, you are able to reserve these amenity spaces through that system, and it does all of that for you, where you can only reserve a certain number, make a certain number of reservations per day and allow a certain number of people. It literally does all of that for you. In other cases, it's left to the doorman, the super, the manager to manage, which is also, depending on the size of the building, not impossible. But yeah, Building Link has been very handy in situations like that.
That's great. And Gina, do you have any other thoughts to best practices when it comes to, reopening spaces and controlling amenity?
I mean, I would concur with Jillian. I do have buildings that don't have Building Link, and it does come down to sort of the staff sort of handling like sign up sheets and doing the health screenings, which we're still required to do. So, I mean, I think that those are your two best options right now, just to sort of keeping a detailed schedule.
Okay, so make sure that the schedule. So when going back to the, front line, which is the doorman and the security and the frontline people, and are you there? Can you require that they wear masks whether or not they're vaccinated, or is that no longer a requirement that you're allowed to permit?
I think you can require it.
You can still require it.
Even though they've been vaccinated.
I think so, but I just want to throw something out there because I saw somebody pose the question about that just now.
Right.
But You know, on one hand, I agree with Jeff 100%. On the other hand, let's just play it out. If a doorman says, now, wait a minute, I'm fully vaccinated here. I've shown you proof. Why are you treating me differently, or why are you imposing this obligation on me that by law and the CDC says it's not necessary anymore? Again, just playing devil's advocate, it could happen that somebody could, start kicking and screaming about it. But I do agree with Jeff. At the outset, a board should be able to tell frontline people, like I was just talking about earlier, you got to keep your masks on. Staff, you got to keep your masks on. It makes people feel safer. And I would hope and expect staff to abide by that.
I mean, the same thing could apply to a resident. They could be yelling and screaming about, if the building adopts just a full on everyone in masks. I think you're right, though. And it's, if you say residents who are vaccinated don't have to wear masks and employees who are vaccinated do have to wear masks, that could be problematic. And,
right. And it's imposing an uncomfortable condition on the employees.
Yeah, but I don't mean problematic. I mean, yeah, maybe it's problematic liability wise, but I think more on a practical operations people thing,
Right.
Why are you saying that they cannot do it and I have to? I think that, if I were on a board, I think if I were going to adopt the policy and I'm going to say that residents, if they're vaccinated, don't have to wear masks, I think I would adopt the same policy for employees.
Right. I agree with that.
Yeah.
And Elise, if you were referring to that last question, then the question, as I remember it, was, can the board stop third parties from coming in, and food deliveries and the like? I would say absolutely yes. That
100%.
goes back to what we were saying, that a lot of the policies are residents who you trust, who are in your community, who say they've been vaccinated are one thing, but people outsiders, no matter, as Jeff said, how trustworthy they probably are, you could draw a line. And I also know that it's very interesting that a lot of COVID implemented practices that I've seen, including in my own building, people actually want to continue. Like, we don't want delivery people roaming our hallways anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So continue to put my food in the elevator, call me, send it on up, and I'll run and go get it, instead of having people wandering all over. Not so terrible. Everybody I've spoken to out of our clients still wants to keep that going.
Yeah, I think you're going to see that a lot. I think you're going to have the old carry forward of things that people got used to in COVID and don't find too bad and maybe would rather be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's security issues for sure. And then in the process for reopening and you mentioned food deliveries, contractors working the property, health screening at the front desk. Can you guys elaborate on that? For example, can you mandate that a gym in the building requires a proof of vaccination in order to use the facility?
Well, I answered a question in the Times about that about 2 months ago. And I said, I have a problem. Actually, the question posed was, can we limit use of the gym to only those people who are vaccinated, was the actual question. So I'm changing your question slightly. And
no, but then we'll take your question.
And then we'll take your question.
Let's do both.
Okay. So I personally think, while it might be tempting to limit use of the gym to only people who show that they're vaccinated, you could run into problems if someone, for a health reason, a pregnant woman wants to go exercise, but she's not going to take the shot. If someone has a religious issue and due to their religious convictions, they don't want to take the shot, then you might have a problem barring those people from coming to the gym, okay, because they haven't been vaccinated. The original question was, can you only have, what was the original question?
So wait, so let's just finish that point, Steve. We've talked about this a lot. The original question was, can you require proof of vaccination? But the question that you raised, which is important, is, can you limit use of an amenity like a gym to only those who are vaccinated? And you're, I think, saying, which I know we've talked about, is yes, except for certain people who have a legitimate reason.
That's
And
right.
then no.
And you may have to make some sort of reasonable accommodation to the religion or the disability
Right.
or whatever it is to accommodate that particular person's status.
Right. And I think that's a mask, maybe. Maybe it's a mask mandate. Maybe it's a mandate that, those people who want to use the amenity and who aren't vaccinated can't be in there with other people. Maybe they have to have their own time to be in there.
Right.
And then as far as the question on can you ask for a vaccination, I think Stephen said earlier, whether you've been vaccinated, unquestionably, you can ask the question. I think the other two issues are what happens if someone refuses to answer? And then what follows from that is if you don't want to go just on the honor system, can you, and we have a couple of buildings doing this, have a system set up where in order to go maskless or use amenities, you have to file your card on Building Link or send your card to the manager of the building or do something to show you've been vaccinated.
Or Jeff, what I've implemented in another building is to sign, if you're going to use an amenity like a swimming pool or the gym or anything else, number one, a COVID waiver still. And number two, on the same form that we've created is an attestation that you've been vaccinated.
Mhm.
Not necessarily asking for a photo of it, but you're swearing under oath that you've been vaccinated.
I think that's a great compromise.
Right?
I really do. I think that, that kind of splits the thing right down the middle.
Exactly. And a lot of people feel more comfortable signing their name to that than saying, I'm not that comfortable about showing a health record. Here are the dates I got shot, and here's the doctor, and here's the hospital, and all that. Some people are a little utsy about that kind of stuff.
Mhm. So it sounds like you can require a proof of vaccination, but the actual,
Well, I think a lot of people object to showing the actual.
right, so the
card.
actual card is more objectionable, but the other areas of proof could be enforced.
Right, or signing a letter. Or one thing Jeff and I were talking about yesterday is that there's this Excelsior app out there that you can upload the information and it essentially says, I've been vaccinated without giving a whole lot of details. That's a good compromise too, if people are sensitive about showing any of their, what they perceive to be private records.
And is this something that you can put in across the board just for shareholders in general? Or now we're not talking about just, amenity spaces, we're talking about building wide. Is that something you can put in place or is that?
I think you can.
Okay.
I'm in, I think in the camp that you can ask for proof of vaccination. I think that maybe makes some people feel uncomfortable, I'm saying uncomfortable, a board feeling uncomfortable for asking because what it's saying to your residents or your shareholders, well, New York State says the honor system was okay. Why isn't the honor system good enough for you? And I think that, to me, is the biggest issue. And I think Stephen's suggestion as to signing an attestation where instead of, someone thinks twice about saying, yeah, I'm vaccinated. I think they have to think a little harder to take a pen and sign a piece of paper saying that they are vaccinated.
Right.
And I think that's a very good kind of halfway meeting point.
Mhm. So Stephen, you're on the same page with Jeff in that regard.
Yeah, the only reason I differ slightly is I think that you can require people to show you proof. But if a board goes to, let's say in a condominium, I want to see proof from everybody that you've been vaccinated. I think you get a vast majority of people saying, here's the card, okay? Here, so you've got a record that apartment 4A has been vaccinated. But practically speaking, you're gonna get some people who say, I'm not showing you anything of mine, it's personal. And then you're gonna have the board say, well, if you're not showing us proof of vaccination, then you've got to continue wearing a mask in the hallway. And then they're not going to, and then the board fines them. and then it's going to wind up in a crazy litigation. I mean, I think that's just an unfortunate consequence that will happen with some people if they are pressed to give proof. That's why I thought a happy medium, maybe I would sign an affidavit or do something that brings it closer to the line. That's a better happy medium.
So, yeah, Jillian.
Any of our buildings that have building link and use it to reserve amenity spaces like the gym, like I said, they are using that as a way to control the process. Part of that is agreeing to the gym membership waiver and the COVID restrictions. You can obviously, like we're saying, add a proof of vaccination there. But on top of that, the buildings that I manage are still, those that have a gym, they still have a log at the front desk, the health screening log. And they're required to stop there before they go to the gym to answer the questions that we're all very familiar with now. Like, have you been tested positive for COVID within the last 14 days? Have you knowingly been in contact with anyone with COVID within the last 14 days? All of those questions are there. They have to sign off on that. We can add there as well, whether or not they have proof of residency. So in an effort to
Proof of vaccination, yeah.
Yeah, sorry,
Right.
thank you.
Yeah.
But in an effort to control the number of people that go in and out of the gym, they have to stop there after as well, so that we know who's in the gym and at what time. So, yeah.
I just find it interesting just to make a comparison. If you're saying you have to do that every time you go into this particular gym,
Yes.
you know, I go to Equinox. They totally stopped taking temperature, totally stopped, logging or anything like that. And it's a free for all. What it boils down to really is how overly cautious does a board want to be? And I think the overarching theme, quite frankly, is we're still not out of the woods. So what harm is there of being just a little bit more careful for the time being? We're not going to stay this way forever, but everybody in the building, bear with us. We're not doing it for our health, although they are, haha. But we're doing it to protect everybody, right? So play along for a few more months. Let's get the New York State vaccination rate from 52% to 65, 70%, and we'll start relaxing things, and we'll be there really soon. It's for everybody's benefit.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And it sounds, again, like it really depends on your particular building and what the voices are saying in your building. And then not to rephrase it, but are you saying that if you cannot validate shareholder vaccination status in a particular building, and you don't necessarily want to rely on the trust, situation, can you ask that they put some sort of, can you do a survey?
So I've dealt with that too.
Mm-hmm.
And, you could try to do a survey and hope people will voluntarily tell you if they've been vaccinated. But again, you're going to run into people who aren't going to respond to the survey or are going to say, I'm not responding to the survey because it's none of your business.
When you say survey, at least, do you mean a questionnaire or a survey saying, do you want people to have proof of vaccination?
So this is a question from someone in the audience. They might ask it again. I'm sure it probably had to do with the general survey, maybe,
Okay.
and that they would circulate to the building and
So
then,
just find out how many people in the building's population are vaccinated.
right.
Right. So I stand by my answer. You'll
Mhm.
get some people, hopefully most volunteering the answer,
Mhm.
and other people saying it's none of your business, and other people just ignoring it.
Mhm. So now turning to another area of concern for many people would be the elevator, because there's obviously social distance is still something that is mandated by most people. Can you discuss mask etiquette in general, maybe in an elevator or, an area where an employee who is refusing to be vaccinated and then also refusing to wear a mask? And again, with exception to religious, or other medical reasons. Is there any recourse for non-mask users at this stage?
Oh, wait, first of all, you got to be a mask user if you haven't been vaccinated. So there's no such thing as having a religious belief that you can't wear a mask. So, and there are ways to enforce it. plenty of buildings had put in place COVID rules, and those rules have fines in them that if the rules aren't being followed, after notice, the resident who's not following can be fined. I mean, I think that's perfectly legitimate. You do have to have that set of rules in place. I mean, in terms of elevators, it's pretty close contact. I think, if you're going to say that you don't have to wear masks, then I think that probably means you don't have to wear a mask in an elevator. But I think that people who are on elevators and feel uncomfortable if the elevator is too crowded, I think those in the building still have to respect if the elevator door opens up and the person says, no, too many people, don't come in. I think you have to respect that.
Well, or I was going to say that if I'm vaccinated and I'm maskless and I get into an elevator and two people with masks are sitting there, like hanging out right next to me, I may want to get out of that elevator,
Right.
So I'm sure that'll happen.
So it sounds like there is recourse available if you're maskless and not vaccinated as a staff member. But as from a union perspective, is there any difference on that?
Well, from a union's perspective, the union's position is that an employer, the building, can't require that an employee be vaccinated. They certainly can require that they wear a mask. That is certainly perfectly legitimate, and they can do so.
Even if they are vaccinated, definitely, right?
Well,
And
they can require it if they're vaccinated, but that goes back to what we were talking about before,
Right.
that it might create this, if you're going to let the residents be unmasked and not the employees, you're going to have this kind of, I think, this confrontation between the, different rules for different people.
So you cannot mandate that a current employee be vaccinated.
No.
But, okay, but can you require new hired employees, like you're hiring new employees to be vaccinated?
So there are a couple of companies out there who have said that they're going to do that.
Delta Airlines.
Delta Airlines came out and said that. In terms of union employees in New York City, the union's position is you cannot require vaccination as a condition of employment right now, today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering that. So now elaborating a little bit more on liability, and we've already touched a lot on these topics. When it comes to building visitors, health screening, can a building ask if a visitor has been vaccinated? I believe you were saying,
Yes.
yeah. Yes. But
Yes.
and if they are not vaccinated, you can mandate that they wear a mask in the building.
Yes.
Okay.
And you can mandate that everybody wear a mask.
Uh-huh.
Well,
You
all visitors.
So mask mandates are no longer, they're not a thing. You still can put that in place.
Correct. Absolutely. 100%.
Okay. And when it comes to building staff, you cannot mandate that they be vaccinated, and you cannot mandate that new hires be vaccinated as of yet.
Correct.
Right.
But can you put incentives in place so that they could potentially get vaccinated while on the clock or what have you?
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
there are a
In
couple.
fact, you have to.
There's a union rule that says the union employees, at least for 32B, 32J, are entitled to take, actually, this is an exception, Lise, that they're entitled to take up to 4 hours of paid leave to go get vaccinated. If they do that, that opens the door for the building, the employer, to say, show me proof of your vaccination, because we let you loose for 4 hours and we want to make sure you went to go do what you were supposed to go do.
Makes sense. And then when it comes to outside staff coming into the building, for example, a contractor who's doing a renovation on a property, can you ask them for proof?
You can ask anybody
I
for
think you
proof.
can ask them for proof. Absolutely. Yes.
100%. And you can
100%.
also, as we've been discussing, have them wear a mask. They're not a resident.
Okay. Thank you.
And what happens inside an apartment's another story. You can't police that.
Right.
But you'd hope and expect the unit owner, shareholder, or resident will say, are you vaccinated? If so, you can take off your mask. If not, you keep that mask on.
Mhm. So boards can
Or
feel
keep your
conflict-
mask on no matter what.
Mhm.
Right.
Which they can do also.
Right. I don't feel
Yeah.
comfortable. If you're working for me, I want you to keep your mask on, and you would be within their right to say that.
Mhm. So when in doubt, keep the mask on. And that is just a general thing, but boards can ask about vaccination. They can feel comfortable asking that question.
Yes.
It's good to know. All right, so I think, I'm sure people have a lot of questions unless we've touched upon anything in this area that you have more words of wisdom to share, but we do know that people have a lot of questions because, this is a disconcerting time for certain reasons, for example, opening up the roof, right? So now roof is an outdoor space. How do you feel about wearing masks or enforcing mask wearing on a roof deck? Is that something, because now it's outside in the open, is that something that's come up for you?
Well,
I-
go ahead, Jeff.
Again, this goes back to the general kind of rule that if you want to, as a board, say, no matter where you are in the building, on the roof deck, in the gym, in the hallway, in the elevator, you have to wear a mask. The board has the ability or the authority to do so. You're going to get pushback, though. I mean, obviously, if you have a roof deck and people know that it's outside and they're going up to the roof, my guess is they're going up there because they don't want to wear a mask. So even though you can do it, I think as a practical matter, you're going to get some residents or all residents who are pretty angry if you're going to mandate that on the roof deck.
And then from an ACAM perspective, and maybe, Stephen and Jeff, feel free to share as well. How do you determine, the number of people that should be allowed to use certain spaces, like a terrace or a pool? Is there, a certain metric that you use, or is it based on the board?
Well, I'll speak for a quick second that there are indoor limits still in effect.
Okay.
There's a residential gathering limit of 50 people indoors. And for catered events and those types of events, it can be 250 indoors with proper distancing in place. And, those are guidelines, which, by the way, not to digress too much, but the residential gathering limit of 50 indoors with proper spacing between people really helps us as lawyers and presumably you as management to tell your co-op and condominium board clients that we still have to have a Zoom meeting this year because it's going to be hard to find those venues that can accommodate. Although I'm waiting for some people to say, well, you can have a catered event of 250 people indoors, so we should just serve everybody dinner and get Cipriani's. I'm waiting to hear that one. But I think overall, for those reasons, we won't have the annual meetings live yet.
We do know if you do that, though, you'll probably have better attendance because you'll be serving food.
Right.
And if you serve drinks, forget it.
Right. Now it's a party. Now it's really a party.
Right.
And are there any best practices, Jillian and Gina, that you've seen in regard to the number of people in this limited, space, so that, for example, parties don't go out of control? I know, Jillian, you mentioned an occasion. What enforcement parameters have you put in place to make sure that the building in general feels comfortable as we start to expand our limits?
Well, I think that what I'm noticing the most amongst the buildings that I manage and a lot of the buildings in our portfolio is that they are taking a stricter view on this, and they are putting a limitation on the number of people that can be in spaces, and often they are requiring masks, just not only because it feels a little bit safer, but it is easier to police. So that is what I'm seeing across the board really right now.
And Elise, if I could just add, I think that what I've seen is that a lot of my buildings are definitely, especially for indoor, private gatherings in people's apartments and units, they're starting to, say, not an unlimited number. I have a few buildings that have put numbers like no more than 20, and those guests need to wear masks. My buildings with roof decks that allow for private parties are also limiting the number of people. I think the largest number we've, given, and it depends on the size of your roof deck, has been around 50 people. I mean, and the real reason is that, depending on the size of your building and, having 50 guests on a roof deck, 20 people having a gathering in an apartment, that's a lot of people coming through your lobby, needing to still get health screened, a lot of interaction with your staff. So, people are still trying to be a little reserved. But if you think about just the number of people, that's quite a number of people, maybe on a single evening.
And the limit for indoors is 50. I mean, I remember back in the earlier days of the pandemic when the limitation was 10 people in an apartment. And when people would exceed that number, the best recourse, quite frankly, was to call the police.
Correct.
So one of the challenges that someone mentioned that they face if they amend the rule on masking, for example, if a person's fully vaccinated, that they don't need to wear a mask within the building, how are they going to enforce people who aren't vaccinated that go maskless? So, they're thinking this gets more complicated when people are on an upper floor or the elevator opens and someone asks to get inside and they're not masked. They don't want to have to make their staff be a mask police, but they also don't want to have a hostile, situation between residents. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I would think the staff has a responsibility to everybody, including to report to the board, that if there's someone who's not vaccinated, who's walking around the building, up and down the elevator and in the hallways without a mask on, that person should be reported. And I'm sorry, it may sound like a rat, but at the end of the day, it's for everyone's protection. And assuming the governing documents allow it, that person could in fact be fined. All right, Jeff, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree. I mean, listen, even though there are probably are some who against it or opposed to it, or I don't have any problem with, saying to the residents, look, we'd appreciate everybody in the building who's been vaccinated to report to us that they've been vaccinated and at least keep a log and reflect, which people have been vaccinated. I think it's clearly easier in smaller buildings than large buildings with hundreds and hundreds of apartments. But, still asking for proof and keeping track is probably the best way.
Yeah, and back to the staff having to police it. I mean, we are here to help the staff with that. It obviously can be difficult to have to say no to a resident, a shareholder, an owner when you're so used to giving a certain level of service, but we help them by giving them the script or some language that they can use. And if it still doesn't go anywhere, then yes, they should absolutely let us know as management so that we can take it from there.
One thing that I saw recently that I think is maybe an effective technique is a building that I went into recently had a sign posted at the front door that said that, you're coming into the building. If you're not wearing a mask, you are therefore certifying that you've been vaccinated. And, again, I think just seeing it in black and white and someone reading it has a little bit more impact than if, someone really is playing games and they haven't been vaccinated and they just want to walk around without their masks on and be, that disrespectful and just ignore the rules. So I think that kind of technique where the sign goes up and someone is hit with that as they walk in the door, that might deter some people.
I agree with that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, it seems like the elevator is still a point of contention because it's a very small space and there's still that level of awkwardness when it comes to a person. What are your thoughts on mandating one person or one family to an elevator, masked or otherwise? It just isn't across the board rule. Is that something that should be put in at this time, or have we moved
I think
past
those
that?
days are sort of past. I mean, we're getting past that, I think, that if a building is starting to move in the direction of saying, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask inside, I would say that includes the elevators. And if you are vaccinated, but like I said before, and someone with a mask is in the elevator, then it's up to you if you don't want to get in the elevator.
But Elise, if the question is, and again, I go back to, if the question is, listen, we don't care. We still want to be really conservative and we still want to say only one family in the elevator.
You can do it.
I think you can do it,
You can
but
do
I don't know how much longer you're going to be able
Right.
to do it. But for
Right.
the time being, I think you can do it.
And Jeff, I agree. That goes back to the whole, it's better be safe than sorry for now.
For now,
And just a little bit longer, and let's all just wait that
Hang
next
on.
couple months and
Yep.
hang on.
Right. And it sounds like it's funny on the flip side, some buildings, it sounds like are struggling with residents that just want to ride alone, and that's causing strife in the building. So do you have any, thoughts on that as far as, enforcing people to not ride elevators alone? So it doesn't, I guess the wait time probably is the result, a very long wait time for an elevator. Have you seen any best practices regarding that?
You mean somebody who says, I'm in the elevator now and it stops on a floor below?
Right.
And that one elevator rider says to the other people, you can't get in the elevator?
Yeah. That sounds tough.
I mean, I think that's a little nervy.
Yeah.
I think, up to now, we certainly would say that you can do that. I
Mhm.
think as the days pass, days, not weeks, that's going to be tougher and tougher. And,
With the new
that's-
CDC guidelines.
And
Mhm.
but it's going to be, people might start to react really, not violently, but aggressively if people start to do that. So I think a board has got to consider that and
Mhm.
say, okay, today's Tuesday, we're going to still allow it, but by Friday or next Tuesday after, it's going to be tougher and tougher to keep that up.
Right, because it's going to
Mhm.
change.
Yeah.
Do you think it's realistic to expect that staff is going to monitor this list of vaccinated residents in order to then stifle the issue of the unmasked residents, or?
I think it's going to be tough for staff. I think some of it's going to fall on you guys as the agent at the
Mhm.
home base to kind of, like Jillian said, maybe do it through Building Link, because obviously we know staff in buildings, like Steven said, they don't want to rat out people in the building because then they'll, the staff, the residents will kind of have it in for them.
Right.
So I think some of it's going to have to go back to the home base and, you're going to have to run it through there.
And what are your thoughts on doing a survey to get shareholder perspective on the leasing guidelines and, not just necessarily asking vaccination status, but it wouldn't be a vote, just to gather information so that way it educates the board to make a decision? Have you seen that done?
I haven't seen that done. I mean, look, surveys cut both ways.
Mhm.
If you start asking questions, people start getting this expectation that you're going to start implementing whatever you're asking about.
Mhm.
But then again, it's always nice for a board to know what the general consensus is in a building. And
Right.
if you can't all gather in the lobby yet,
Mhm.
then that's the next best thing, right? So if you can't have that town hall
Mhm.
meeting, or do it over Zoom and have a conversation with people, but a survey could work.
Yeah, I mean, I think a survey is a good idea. I mean, it takes the
Yeah.
pulse of people in the building, We did a survey here very recently in our office to take people's pulses on how they feel coming back to the office, how they feel being in the office, and it was received well, and it allowed people to voice their concerns. And yeah, honestly, I agree with Stephen. We weren't, because one person said they were uncomfortable with a particular thing, that doesn't mean we might have to change it. But it really gave us a good feel for how those that work with us and those people in our company were feeling. And I think the same goes for residents.
Mhm. Right. And again, you keep speaking to the fact that it really is building dependent. So if you want to get a pulse of your building, that might be a good way to do it.
100%.
So looking forward to, hopefully getting past this pandemic, do you see like a way that a board can implement situations like the current mandate where, as we get to flu season, now if it's a bad flu season, can you start to implement mask wearing as a board or proof of flu vaccine? Or do you think that this is pandemic and move on?
I think unless there's a CDC or governmental guideline that is mandating it or heavily suggesting it,
Mhm.
I don't think it will be well received in a building if next year there's, an increase in the flu and a board enacts a policy, everybody needs to wear a mask. That's just my feeling. I don't know. Jeff, what do you think of that?
I agree. I mean, I will say that we will get out of this and we will get through this, but I agree with Stephen 100%. I mean, unless there's some sort of, quote, what we've been calling a pandemic, I don't see, an increase in the number of flus in one particular winter being an invitation to mandate mask wearing. I guess,
Right.
Again, I go back to boards do have, great deference is given to their decision. And if, for instance, the number of flu cases in New York City during flu season all of a sudden jumps by threefold, is there a reasonable reason that you could say that you have to require masks? Maybe, but
I think there would be a revolt.
I think you have to really, I think you have to take into account the people, how they feel in the building.
Yeah, and I think it comes down again just to the fact that it sounds like, mask wearing is something that we've gotten comfortable, and used to at this point. And if you think that there are people in your building that you're concerned about, for health reasons, and you don't think that the rest of the building is going to work on a consensus, then you might still keep the mask wearing condition until, new data is determined. But it sounds like it really depends on the pulse of the building for you as the board to make your decision. Is that?
I think the pulse of the building and science and what data is telling us. That's
right.
Yep, I agree.
So we're wrapping up here. And of course, as new data comes in, we're going to obviously provide more information, but do you have any last words of wisdom you'd like to leave our guests tonight? I can start in order. I don't want to make like a teacher and call you out. Gina, I'll start with you.
Sure. No, I think that this was, I hope, very helpful to everyone. I think that once again, we talk about getting the pulse of the building, and I think it's very important. I think surveys are a great way of doing that. And those buildings that have Building Link can also just run them easily on that platform. Obviously, you always can do them by paper. And I think we're in an ever-changing environment right now. So the conversations we're having today may change in a week or a month. And I think we're just going to have to, unfortunately, be very, deal with the fluidity of the situation and just sort of take it day by day. And we're going to have issues in buildings. I manage buildings. Jillian manages buildings. We're going to have individual issues. And I think that people just need to be very respectful. Everyone's at a different level with this pandemic, and we just have to, as managers and board members and residents, you just have to sort of deal with what's coming at you daily and try to do your best for everyone.
Good advice. Stephen, your turn.
I think by and large that buildings that decide to go maskless, if you've been vaccinated, will be just fine. And I think the buildings that want to play the better safe than sorry role will all be fine too. I do think overall, there are more buildings that I'm seeing that want to take the better safe than sorry approach. It's a more cautious approach. I don't want to offend anybody and say it's a more prudent approach, because I don't want to insult anyone's decision the other way. But certainly with a building that might have more elderly people and those more susceptible to having problems if they contract COVID, might be more sensitive to waiting a little longer before relaxing the rules.
And Jeff?
I would say be positive that we are getting through this, and we will, I hope by, through the summer, continue to progress. I think we progress cautiously, but moving forward and remembering, as Gina said, to be respectful of others, but be ready to move on, really is it. And I think, moving on means following the science and taking our masks off and getting to that next point where we, see ourselves getting back to normal. And I think we're getting there. I think we're closing it.
and Jeff's favorite line, most well-known line in our office, which is good for everyone, is we will persevere. We all will, and we'll all get through it.
Although I have a new line now, I'm changing it.
Oh,
We have persevered. Now we have to start to flourish.
nice.
Very good. I like it. I like it. And Jillian.
I knew you were just gonna call on me after that finishing.
I'm sorry. You can give me some good wisdom if you want.
No, but honestly, I think that everyone really has said it. It's a difficult time right now, and it's only getting better. I think we all just need to adapt with change and get ready to move forward.
Great. Well, thank you all for your wonderful advice this evening. I'd like to thank Stephen Sladkis, Jeffrey Schwartz, Gina Fazzolaro, and Jillian Berman for joining us tonight. And thank to all of you for enjoying this evening with us. And please, we have all of our information on the side. We definitely love hearing from you. So please, if you have any questions tonight or tomorrow or whenever, please feel free to email us and we will be happy to respond to you. So everyone be safe and have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Good
Thank
work,
you for
ladies.
having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.